Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Sex Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Andra, where the topic about sex is from the point of view of an older woman. Hello, all you sexual-driven people. I hope we are enjoying, or at least enjoyed our holiday, and are now getting back to, well, the new groove in life with COVID. I know there is a vaccine out there now, and, if you got it, you got it. You didn't, you didn't. There's a little controversy over it, but hey, let the big boys take care of that, while we just sit back and talk about the things we actually like to do, like sex. Now, the question's been posed, obviously, or at least used in the wrong manner, of being addicted to love. Can you be addicted to love? Well, really, what exactly is it if you break it down? What is that addiction? That you think about that person all the time. You want to do the most of that person. You want to do anything that person asks of you because you want to please them. That constant thinking about doing something, doing those different activities with. And that's really where a lot of this, like that persistent preoccupation with one person. It's not always detrimental. It is the human nature of love. And the same thing with sex, being addicted to sex. Now, before you start going a little crazy out there, there is actually disorders, which too much sex or too much love, to the point where that addiction is uncontrollable. It's obsessing. It is interfering with your lifestyle and trying to literally function. And the big dispute out there, love addiction, sex addiction, obviously most of us have all heard, if not are using in our daily work as therapists, the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And obviously, because this was published by the American Psychiatric Association, that over-obsession, that, oh my God, I can't get enough of you, just walk in the door naked and I will jump you because I will be ready. That love, that overly love, is referred to in there as the hypersexuality. We know it's there. And it just, this particular, the definition that refers to is excessive sex drive, which, okay, sometimes you have that, but sometimes you find that one person who actually loves that. And that is not a problem, so you don't find it to be called a disorder in terms of the DSM-5. So live your life that way. Now that it's really a complex thing, but when we're talking about sex, that doesn't exactly we're not exactly sitting back and saying that, because it's enjoyable to whoever is out there and who is, pleasing their mate. And most of the times it's more towards a woman than it is a man, which, due to equality there, men, sorry, you're in there too. That preoccupation is really what is the harmful part in that. How do you get beyond this? Because this is going to lead into the remainder of the topic for the show today, which is kink shaming. Yes, I am going there. Kink shaming. Some of you know what that is, some of you don't, but I will explain it a little later. We're not started. We're going to just talk about this right now. Obviously, flourishing through this whole hypersexuality or that love addiction, we have in our daily lives profound activities which are essential to us, to our development and well-being. They're, they're superficial activities that we have, a more limited a more limited effect on us, shall I say, or impact upon us. But, instrumental activities, we perform these activities in order to achieve a certain goal, obviously. May it be sexual, may it be in the, work field, may it be wherever. But when it becomes that obsession, well, that's where it becomes that issue. But we do also have that intrinsic activities that we perform because we value and typically enjoy them, and that is sex. So we don't look at them as intrinsic, we look at them as positive. But can we go without it? Well, some people can and some people can go without sex. Do you want to? Probably not. It's something that most people very much enjoy. So we hold those dear to us and we basically act them out on a continued basis. So we really need to look at that, that intrusive, profound activity. These activities are very crucial for having that long-term profound love in our lives and present in what we do. So we always look for that profound satisfaction, but we all know, if anybody knows history, that relates to Aristotle's notion of human flourishing. And they were very, very sexual back in that time period. So remember, always good. And they were a little bit more comfortable, I think, with regards to their sexuality and putting it out there. And all of these elements, this profound love, it's not a temporary state of like that superficial pleasure. It is more of involving a longer period of time to fulfill. And it's a natural thing in human life to have this and to continue with it and flourish from it. That love and being addicted to it is a good thing. just as long as you know not to go too far overboard and being able to recognize when it has gotten out of control. Now you may ask yourself, is wanting to be with your partner an obsession? Well, obsession is really the primary symptom of an addiction, and that's of any addiction, because they do define that as a persistent, disturbing preoccupation with an often unreasonable idea of feeling. And this is right in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, so you can go up there and look it up. And when you're reading that, you really got to decipher what words are the damaging and the most important ones, which are the disturbing and unreasonable part of that definition. I mean, if someone is persistently preoccupied with an idea or a person, well, there is a particular level. It's not generally harmless. It's in and of itself. It's just as long as it doesn't harm you from able to move on or to flourish within that love addiction. Always remember the positives in it, because positive is what it's all about, not obsessing, because that obsession is the negative portion of that definition there. Is there repetition? Yes, absolutely. And with repetition, there is an event that reoccurs regularly or intermittently. Our human behavior alone is repetitive. It's often, when we get stuck in doing that same repetition in our daily lives, which is, what is someone to kind of come up with you say? If you're sitting there talking about sex and you're continually saying the same thing over and over again, what's your friend going to say? Oh, why don't you try something different? You're kind of sort of repeating the same thing. Granted, if that's what you like, go for it. But if you're sitting there talking about it and you're expressing the fact that you're bored, basically, but without coming out and saying it, you really need to get up and break that repetition, because it'll get to a point where it basically deactivates your human activity or your human capacity. So you don't want that. You want to maintain it. Difference and, variety, especially in sex, because having a lovely, what is it called? A lovely smorgasbord, that's the word, of sexual positions or sexual actions or things that you want to do, keeps your mind moving. It is not harmful at all. Please do that. We have little addictions that we have every day. When you come home, you got to watch the same show on TV. Oh, and our big thing was with the soap operas, back in the day, I got to be in the house for my soap operas, which I could never understand what the big deal was, because, granted, I have to say I didn't watch soap operas. And if I'm not mistaken, they are still on. I really didn't think that they were, but they're there, and that can become an addiction. Try breaking somebody away from their 1 o'clock, and this is what you always heard, especially when I was younger, that 1 o'clock, the streets would be cleared out because everybody had to be in the house to watch 1 o'clock soap operas. So it was like a ghost town, and me not being the person who watches them would be like, well, where did everybody go? So you gotta look at that. It's an obsession. Can we love too much? Well, how it's really whether love is an addiction. or if it's been seen as an addiction. Or depends on if loving can be excessive. Is there too much love? You can love somebody to the point of it being dangerous, absolutely. So you got to really be able to distinctly, be able to go from romantic love to, oh my God, you're over the top. You can't move or do anything without that person being there. It's becoming intrusive. So there is a line there, and recognizing that line is very, very important, especially because if you'll get a lot of people who meet somebody for the first time, and you were getting along together when you were on talking and stuff like that. Then you go on the first date, and one of you, sees that person, and then all of a sudden becomes overly obsessed with this individual, knowing that this is who you want, but in reality, what you're doing, you are pushing them slightly away. So just giving you a little bit of that. We are now going to take our first break in the show, and when I come back here, we're going to go into kink shaming, because now there's that obsession or that little kink that you want to put out there, and people are making fun of you. So go get that drink, go get that snack, come back, get relaxed and comfortable, and meet me back here for more sex talk with Andra.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Sex Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Andra, where the topic about sex is from the point of view of an older woman. Welcome back. I hope you are now well stocked up for the next segment in the show, where we're talking now, moving right along, into kink shaming. Now, some of you who do know that, and there are some of you who do not, so I will explain. Obviously, if you make in front of an individual because they are obese, shall I say, not obsessed, obese, obviously you are making fun of them because they have extra weight on them. You're shaming them for being fat. And that's what that's called, fat shaming. So now let's take it into the sexual world. And that can be anything. If you, the biggest tease that was going around when we were kids was like, oh, you wore glasses, you were 4 eyes. So you're basically shaming us because we want to be able to see. So moving that into the sexual realm, it becomes kink shaming. In making fun of somebody because they have a particular kinky style in their sex life that they like to play out. They want to find that partner that matches that, obviously. Or they're making fun of you because you like to do a lot of anal sex, or which probably wouldn't be made of, because there are a lot of people out there that actually prefer that now. But if you like a particular way your sex is to be done, and they're making in front of you because of it, well, that would be a form of kink shaming. So I'm going to give you exactly how they like to define kink shaming. And this is really when you cite someone's sexual predilections as a reason that they're a bad person, or attempt to embarrass somebody for what they like to do in bed. That's like the negative part of it, but some people actually take the kink shaming as a sex positive one. And this is really where people believe that having sexual predilections is not inherently wrong. We each like something in the bedroom in a particular way that something turns you on sexually. So if we make fun of that, we're basically kink shaming you. But this is what you like to do privately, and it's what you like to do as adults in your bedroom, and that is entirely your prerogative. If you don't like it, you're not there. That person that they're having that sex with, that kind of sex that you find in our kink shaming, you're not in the bedroom with them. Sometimes you can look at it more of a jealousy type thing, whereas they were wishing they were in the bedroom doing that to you when somebody else is, and they're pissed, and this is the way they get around it by, kind of basically shaming you for what you love to do sexually. It is your business what goes on behind closed doors. When it goes beyond that normalness, shall I say, or beyond that love or sex addiction, that's where something needs to be said and done, and that's usually the opposite person who is in the bedroom with you that will get up and say something. So, now, what kind of kinks get shamed? Well, obviously, the more unusual the kink is, the more likely that person is going to be shamed for that kink. Obviously, first one out there is fetishes, and taking to be like toes, or dressing up a certain way, or treating, treating your person like a slave. But this is something that they like, but you're being shamed for it. And you get those people out there who say like this, oh my God, how could you do that? Well, they're actually going to the opposite person for which the act is being performed on, where they'll turn around, how can you let that person do that to you, or anything like that? But they are enjoying it because they have the same interests of who they're having this particular kinky sex with. So there are other ones that are out there, and everybody's human and everybody does it. One where the person likes to think they're an adult baby, or pretends, where, this is where they pretend baby, and they dress up as a baby, and they'll like nap, they'll even, breastfeed, and things like that. And that generally always gets kink shamed. But why should they be shamed for having a very fruitful and imaginative sexuality and sexual encounters? So you need to stop and look at what you got and what you're doing. Believe it or not, rape and non-consent fantasies. And this is usually these these are actual fantasies that are most common amongst women. And those are the ones that are going to get the most kink shaming, because there is a fine line there. Obviously, if someone is raped, that's not a good thing. Or if somebody has non-consenting fantasies with another person, not a good thing. It's, like I always say, educate, communicate, consent to avoid all that. But those are the things the women would love having these. They're usually the ones that want that sexual fantasy of having that helplessness and that feeling of not in control, it being taken, sex being taken from them. And even talking about it can put your mind in different areas with it. So there's really, really, really a very, very fine line between that fantasy to reality, because the person who's actually performing the sexual act could easily get wrapped up in it, and it does go over that line. So just remember that. Obviously, mainstream BSDM is very much on the rise and increasing in the sexual population. But now, like back in the day, you would be really shamed for that kink, that, oh my God, you're just way out there. I would never. You get all that. Now it's much more accepted, but it is still out there, and there again is that fine line. It is possible for somebody to lose your job or even custody of your children due to your sexual preferences, and you don't want that. Does it actually happen? Oh God, it happens more times than people would probably like to admit. I guess there was a case out there. Katie Price's ex-husband, Alex Reed, he was a cross-dresser. He cross-dresses as an alter ego Roxanne. So, and it has been used against him very, 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 very much on numerous occasions. You got to remember all of that. Is there a problem with it? Yeah, there is. There's a massive problem with it. It's a problem because it prevents an individual from being able to live their life authentically, or the way that they want to live it. Come on. Think about it here. Being gay. What's the first thing? It was a lot more shamed, kink shame. Years ago, and it's more acceptable now, but you still have people out there with that mentality of who do not believe in that kind, and that these two people of the same sex should not be together. The big debate in the churches, the Bible, all of this stuff are coming into play. But if you actually sat back and thought about it, and thought about them, they found love. And how did you find love? So it was with the opposite sex. Think about how you feel is the same way they are feeling when they're with that person, their same sex. In that, or whatever sexual preference that you have, there's a difference there. It makes your situation makes you happy, their situation makes them happy. And no one should ever be shamed over that. It's especially, becomes very problematic when having a niche sexual interest where they can land you or could put you out in the public eye. And that's where all the other things go downhill. Like I said earlier, with losing the job, get your kids being taken away from you because of your sexual preference. And believe it or not, this is very, very legal. It's sad, but it's legal. And the reason why it's legal for you to lose your job is because they consider it brings a company to disrepute. You're dealing with their reputation, and they don't want to have that in there. However, if you get that company where it gives them that added boost, and that's what you are all about, and it works for you, it could go that way too. A lot of people ask, aren't people with weird fetishes really messed up? No, they're not. Not at all. They're just all different sexual triggers for the most enjoyable sex for them and their partner. Their turn-ons, really big turn-ons. It's just a little, that what happens with that, if you want to consider it normal couple, may not be the same kink, turn-on, trigger, whatever you want to call them. If you have a different thought process and you have a little bit more in tune with your kinkiness. And nowadays, it's really more acceptable, but you still have those individuals who are still living back in the olden times, and there you go. But it's just that they're different on what turns them on. They may think what you do, which is quote-unquote normal, may be something that they don't want to do. It might be the total opposite effect. You kind of sort of put the shoe on the other foot with this topic. And there isn't any evidence to suggest that people with minority or different of those fetishes are any more likely to be dangerous or criminal. There's nothing in there that states that they're gonna be different, because it's what you like, it's your preference. See, what you don't seem to realize is that if you're banishing someone because of their kinky style and kink shaming, and then you're doing something and you get caught and all this other stuff happens where you lose your job and your kids and everything, but you got to stop and look and put it into perspective and how it actually works. So, on that note, I am going to take a break. So please replenish that drink, replenish that snack, come back, put your hand back in your pants, and I'll meet you back here for more sex talk with Anna.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Sex Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Andra, with a topic about sex. It's from the point of view of an older woman. Now, our topic is kink shaming, which is basically being discriminating against somebody and making in fun of them for their sexual preference or their sexual turn-ons, triggers, or anything that makes them go, ba-da-da-da. And with that, you gotta stop and ask yourself, if we've been doing this for years, shaming people, and we have, for our sexual preferences, then how the heck did we get this far in sexual relations and, growing so much in it being sex so more acceptable and out there now with all the different things that go on? So, it's really, if we're going to look back at all of these practices, or a person who engages in a kink, we need to also look back on how deeply rooted those problematic stigmatizations are, or stereotypes really are, and where do they stem from? Obviously, this concept of intentionally invoking shame in someone else, obviously for their erotic desires, is nowhere near anything new. The problematic ideology view that sex should not be pursued solely for the pleasure is obviously reflected in the various past attempts of erasing that particular pleasure. And it always came back to even more, because someone with it's human nature. You tell somebody, no, you can't do that. What do they want to do? They want to do it. So it's human nature for everyone. I mean, you got to really look and reflect on those various past attempts of erasure of that sexual freedom and or expression. You also need to look at how it has contributed and how it attributed to the assault against all kinds of forms of sexual expression that people think are abnormal. Come on, taboo sex. Anal sex is very, very wrong. And there'll be somebody out there that tells you that it's a taboo sex. What's more enjoyable for most people now? Anal sex. Same thing with BSDM. Looked at as being a very bad form of treatment sexually. Now, that little bit of submission, that little bit of dominance is total turn on for most people in their sexual relation. Those kinks, those triggers, those turn-ons, it could be the smell of a perfume. And what does that person do? Go out and buy that perfume just to smell it, to remind them of the next time when they'll be able to go and see their partner and have sex. They might put the perfume in different spots so their room smells like it. They may have, a mirror. The biggest thing years ago was the mirror on the ceiling, because it was more for the guy than the woman, but the guys like to watch the woman from when they're laying on their back, and they would always ask the woman to get on top. Nowadays, they kind of can go both ways with that one, and it's more enjoyable, I would presume. So, obviously, kinky sexual abnormal ones that, sexual preferences that are considered abnormal, they are also perceived to deviate from the norm in our society when it comes to sex. And obviously the ones, like I said, are taboo: masturbation, sexual orientation, gender identity. There's so many out there. Just think about it. Now, everybody has different erotic desires, and they have changed over the centuries, the millenniums, you name it. And obviously, it's funny because they note here that in the 1800s, particularly 1886, is when psychopathia, sexualists, was there, and that the groundbreaking yet profoundly problematic work of Richard von Krafft-Ebing was published, and he wrote about it. And what he wrote about was the pathologizing oh goodness gracious, that is a tongue twister today. Sexual behavior really blew up. It was not only where he opposed homosexuality and fetishism, but linked them to genetic degeneration. So, and this book is out there, so do go out and look it up. I'm sure if it's really, really old, you could probably find some portion of it, or somebody has it on an ebook somewhere. He also believed that those who took part in unapproved sexual activities were said to be born degenerate and to pass the bad seed on to their children. So he kind of sort of put it out there like it was this genetic thing. You had somebody who thought in a very kinky manner sexually and had these particular sexual desires, was basically an enormous abnormality in mental stability, in that this was due to genetics and that you're going to pass these thoughts on. Although, in a way, if you actually think about it, it's not genetically linked. But if they are taught or seen this, obviously it's normal to them. But if you have a very supportive family relationship, you allow that person to flourish in the way that they want to flourish sexually. So, obviously, and this is going beyond his works, the perception of fetishism and alternative sexual practices were viewed as an expression of, let's say, insanity. And he actually intended to argue against that point, although it doesn't seem like it, but he does. He actually went on to create a new and very dangerous narrative that these desires or behaviors were pathological and could be altered through psychiatry. So it was a mental disease. And if you went to a psychiatrist, they could talk you out of your kinkiness because those weren't normal. But you have Caligula, way even before that time, who had orgies all the time, and he was sadistic. I mean, the way they portray him, if you watch, and there's actually the movie called Caligula. Look it up. And that movie is way out there, and the things that he would do, and they get you screaming in your skivvies. But there are people out there who actually like that. This particular author, his work did become the spark that lit the flame, as they describe it, for unwanted policing and attempted control of sexual behavior and expression. So he basically set the stage in his writings, which jolted all of this kink shaming and things that, though they can be fixed. So, obviously, as time has gone on, even up to today, the views of sexuality and those erotic desires actually have maintained an incredible polarized thought process, believe it or not. It is, everybody looks back, and they always go back instead of going forward, because obviously going back, sometimes, if they looked at the sexual behaviors in, good old golden times as a toxic. And this is basically how, these are where you get your values for sex, where your thought processes for sex, how you become grounded in your mind. And that's how you get raised. So what are you going to do? Because you were raised that way, you're going to raise your kids that way. Now, there's work out there that go beyond von Kraftebing and Freud, believe it or not, because, he was out there. And these are very, very influential individuals, but they were problematic individuals who have contributed to the way we view sex. Come on, what's the first thing that we go to? Freud. Super id, the ego, he really put us in this train of thought. He was a very big influence on how we think. It doesn't make any difference when it comes sexually to thoughts either. Obviously there's that DSM-5 again, that book was published in the 1950s. Obviously, we have changed that book. There was a new edition that just recently brought out, and it was really, if you read it, with regards to the sexual behavior and desires, there has been massive shifts in that book that pertain to that. They put it in there, and which is really, really bad if you actually think about it. Because if you're taking someone's kink, what they enjoy, which is their normal, they may have just developed this over time, as they were discovering their sexual desires and what they like sexually. And now it's being put into a psychiatry book and stating that, well, that's wrong because it's a mental thing and we're going to change you. So you need to go see a psychiatrist. And this has probably happened more times than not. You go in to see that psychiatrist and the psychiatrist says, well, that's very normal. And particularly when the youth are trying different things that are out there because they're really in tune with the sexual scene. And they'll say, they want to experiment. So if you're going to the doctor, oh, I caught him doing this, or I caught her doing this, and da-da-da-da-da. Say to the doctor turns around and says, that's normal. They're exploring, especially in young kids. Their bodies are doing things that they're not aware of. Does that allow for you to go beyond that and sexually abuse them? Absolutely not. You do have something wrong and your children should be taken from you. But as you get older, being able to keep a hand on it, and if it doesn't get out of control, or being able to identify when it does go beyond that point of normal. I'm doing my little quote signs here. And being able to bring that person in to be really checked. So, the book, they're shaking up all different kind of organizations, advocacy groups, and especially like there is a group out there, it's called the it's a notable group, the National Coalition of Sexual Freedom. And obviously their fight is to make that shift of the focus away from the pathological part of all of this, where not everything you do kinky should be shamed, or you should be told you have a mental disability, because you don't. You don't. Having an imaginative sexual mind can be fun, and you can grow off of it, especially if you're with a partner who actually has that same as you. And on that note, I'm going to take the last break in the show. So, if you still have your hands down your pants, keep it there. You don't got to get up and get a drink or snack or anything like that. Completely up to you. But if you are finished, go wash your hands and come back. And I will meet you back here for more Sex Talk with Andra.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Sex Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Andra, with a topic about sex, is from the point of view of an older woman. Now, we are discussing kink shaming, which is where you are being basically discriminative and making fun of someone for their sexual preferences and fetishes and everything they like to do sexually, just because you don't do it. Well, hey, that's every day of the week. There is always going to be that one person that, or something that you do not do that somebody else does do. So making in fun of these individuals is not a positive thing. It is actually a bad thing, because you would not want them to make fun of your sexual pressure, sexual kinks and things you like to do in the bedroom. And it's gone as far as being put into the DSM-5 to be a pathological thing where your extreme kinkiness or your fetish or whatever is pathological. And it's not. Just there are levels, and there can be a fine line in that, just being able to identify when you get to that point. But, that diagnostic standard and that negative history that has just been so out there with respect to views of that eroticism. And it puts roadblocks. It actually puts obstacles in the way of being able to express yourself sexually. To the point, you got that taboo sex that you're not supposed to do. And if you did it, oh my God, they tell you your penis will fall off or your vagina will close up. I mean, it happens. It is out there, and it's obviously more coming out now, but the mere fact of it still kind of sort of hinders some people. I mean, come on, there are sex stores out there now, which are all over the place, and there are tons of people that go into them. I mean, you have amazing, there are ones that are little small ones. Like there's one around where I have seen, it's called Mr. Sister. These places are out there and they are great. Go in there. You might just need it because you are too afraid. That you need to go out and express who you are. They have knowledgeable staff, and that's what you go in there for. Obviously, Amazing is much more known because it's such a big franchise, and I'm not exactly sure on how many people have gone into these places, but if you have, then you know what's in there. Don't be afraid to go in and express who you are in your erotic size, your other, that size that triggers you sexually, is a turn on for you, and the like. Go out there and express it, but make sure that you do not go beyond that boundaries where it turns into something along that. And if someone's, saying that that's not right, you're a little loosey-goosey in the head, that's not good. You're not supposed to be doing that. And they're shaming you for your fetish. I'm assured that they are doing something kinky that you probably would not do, but they're not talking. Sometimes that's a deflection, to be honestly truthful with you, but it is not a pathological thing unless there are other symptoms that go to that, and a psychiatrist is not going to be able to change your thought process with regards to that. Granted, they probably prescribe you some medication which will probably attempt to suppress those thoughts, but that is who you are. Like I said, look back in the times. Sexuality and eroticism and kinkiness has become so much more accepted that it's not. I think that the reason why they put it in the DSM-5 is because they didn't have any other way to do it. Because, and actually, to reach out to those individuals who actually do have that problem. And where the point is, and that fine line is the obsession. And they put it in there. But they need to put it in there in a way where that, so-called normal is not being viewed in that manner as well. And trying to shift that negative sexual kinkiness into a positive. Obviously working towards acceptance of kinkiness and the kink that everybody thinks that there are hundreds of fetishes and everybody has one. It might not be so big that it's the same as what somebody else has, or one that's out there that you even heard of. Every country has a different sexual desire, a sexual ritual, shall I call it, that they perform. Now, us here in America might say, oh my God, I would never do that. But it's normal for them, and they're probably looking at us and saying, oh my God, we would never do that. So you got to look at it that way. It's a normal. You got to work towards, against that judgment, that shame, and that hatred that comes when people are using kink shaming. It could be any kind of shaming. Don't do it. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for either one of you. The one giving it and the one receiving it. So you got to look at it, because everybody wants to be accepted, and especially accepted sexually. And I know it can be very difficult trying to find a partner that sees the same way. But there is someone out there, or it might just be somebody who thinks the same way as you, or is willing, because they love you that much, or they want to be with you, to give your kinky side a try on them, because they may just find out that your kinkiness is just as a turn on to them, to you, to them. So remember that as well. Now there are some affirmations, which will put people ashamed of their kink. I'm sure there's more out there now. Actually, now. So, first one on the list would be that erotic humiliation. To one person, it is exciting, but it also can be a source of incredible anxiety and distress for somebody. So let's not do that, because what you're doing now is you're putting that person, when you're kink shaming, into this little box here, and they are becoming embarrassed. And now, because they feel embarrassed with you, and you're saying this and you're doing this, and they may see you as having a lot of influence on other people, those other people they're viewing as them doing the same thing, and they're also embarrassed around there. So you really don't want to do that. It's not very, very nice. It's actually particularly mean, and it might just be a problem that you have with self-esteem or something like that, and you're wishing, that person's wishing that they were that open as you were, and the way that they get over it is by kink shaming you. So own that kink and play it out, but do remember, as always, to educate, communicate, and consent. It's not a very easy thing, and we all know that. And I mean, you got to think about it in that respect. Even with same sex, that is a preference. It is them. They are individuals. They're expressing themselves. You may not like that. Another person may not like that, be that way, and you are attracted to the opposite sex or another type of sexual dominion that you pick. Well, does it make you happy? Are you in love? You got to look at it that way, because that's how that other person is looking at it. Next affirmation: shame is powerful, and when shame starts to interfere with our self-esteem, our relationships, and or our asexuality or sexuality in general, it does start to take a toll. Obviously, everybody goes out there, and everybody has experienced some kind of shame or stigma put on their kink side. But when they discuss it, they show how much that they are suffering from the depression, the anxiety, the isolation, and actually some despair. And how this is all wrapped around the kink because of kink shaming. And they are feeling as though they're not normal. Well, it is. It is very harmful. And they'll turn around. Their particular kink isn't harming you because you weren't there in the bedroom with them. It was 100% safe and consensual for the two individuals who actually were performing the kink. So if you remember that, you need to stop and take a look back at yourself. Having a kink can be so exciting and enlightening and an awesome experience because it's you, it's what you love, it's what you and your partner love. It might be something that you do before you have sex with your partner, and your partner is well aware of it, and they find it downright sexy. There you go. You gotta accept your kink for your kink as your own. You don't need to worry about all these other nitwits out there. Another affirmation is that's why I think it's so important to put narratives out into the world that counter all the negative messages we get about kink. And that's what the internet is for. Putting all these things out here, giving you that education. That education. Giving you that education on sex and kinkiness and eroticism and all that stuff out there. What makes you, get hot and bothered in the pants and read about them. This way you don't feel so sexually inadequate, so to speak. So, well, that's actually a little bit of a description of what I was going to do. So, now, obviously, what is the realism is, one, there's nothing wrong with you. Okay? It is the society. They take things and put it as a taboo, and it is not. Alright? We have a culture that demonizes and moralizes sexuality or asexuality as a whole. And obviously this is what the sexuality that exists outside of that monogamous relationship and or those vanilla partnerships, quote unquote there. And there are so many myths which you all know about the little kinkinesses that are out there. And those particular things are actually focused on the falsity of it, of that sexual act. So please do look into it. Obviously being safe and having that consent, especially affirmative consent, is very, very important. Making sure not to harm anybody and communicating outwardly. Another affirmation, you aren't the only one, and you are not. There is everybody out there with something different kinky going on in the bedroom. So remember that. And don't, please, with all the educating and the communicating and everything, this should not be anything that is going to catch you off guard. So remember that as well. It doesn't matter how weird it is. It doesn't. Because one person's weird is not weird to you. It's all about who cares. That's your person. And that's how it works. Own your sexual kink. Don't be apologetic or anything. That's something. You really need to embrace your kinky side when it comes to kink shaming, and you have those people out there that are talking about it in that way. Whatever makes you happy, do it. But know where there are limits and put them out there. And the expectations that both you and your partner have. Number 4, it's okay to ask for what you want. Nothing wrong with it. How are they going to know how to please you if you do not tell them? So, as long as you're invited to talk about it, no overly expectations, go right ahead. There is nothing wrong with discussing your kink in detail with somebody. But go outside of the box. Go on, on the internet and look at some stuff. There are groups out there and people who specialize in this. So, number 5, you don't have to be, quote unquote, out. Whereas when you're out there just to show that you're kinky, you're not going to be loud and proud about it. You can be proud, but very diplomatic and very good about it. Whereas, you're comfortable within yourself and your kinkiness. Keep between you and your sweetie, unless, you guys are talking about it and everything. You have that group of people that you are very open with. So there is nothing wrong about that. Don't be apologetic, like I stated. And you don't have to be constantly going to the top, this highest mountain, and exclaiming it. And last affirmation that I am going to address today is you deserve acceptance and respect. Bottom line, having somebody that respects you and accepts you for who you are and all your kinkiness and turn-ons, turn-offs, everything along that line. On that, we are at the end of the show for today. Please think about what you do when you are making fun of somebody else's kinkiness. Take a step back and take a step back and look at yourself. As always, practice safe sex. If not for your partner, for yourself, and vice versa. Also, if you're going to try something new, because we are talking about kinky, please educate, communicate, and some equally important, consent. I'd like to thank you for tuning into the GSMC Sex Podcast, which was brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I do ask that you subscribe to the show, give us that 5 in reviews, say something really nice, because it not only helps me as the person bringing you your kink, or at least outing you for it, but it does help the GSMC Podcast Network to know what to bring to you on topics. Please reach out and sort us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, because we are there. Like us, hit that little heart, or hit that little thumbs up, and please leave us a good review there as well, or put in there what you want to hear on the show, what topics that interest you sexually. And again, I thank you for tuning in, and have an awesome sex night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.